Natalie Diaz's Post-Colonial Love Poem is a fire poem and poetry collection. And today we are going to be hearing Natalie Diaz read the poem, and then we are going to be analyzing the poem and figuring out why it's so good. And Diaz is an indigenous poet, and she writes about the environment, addiction, love, hardship on reservations, and honestly, a wide variety of topics. And she doesn't get lost in the topics though. She doesn't just, do this woe is me confessional poetry. She blends, the environment and other ideas within those poems, and that's what makes them so great. So now we are going to hear Natalie Diaz read Post-Colonial Love Poem, and I will see you guys in a second.
This is the title poem of the book, Post-Colonial Love Poem. I've been taught bloodstones can cure a snakebite, can stop the bleeding. Most people forgot this when the war ended. The war ended depending on which war you mean. Those we started before those millennia ago, and onward those which started me, which I lost and won, these ever-blooming wounds. I was built by wage, so I wage love and worse, always another campaign to march across a desert night for the cannon flash of your pale skin, settling in a silver lagoon of smoke at your breast. I dismount my dark horse, bend to you there, deliver you the hard pool of all my thirsts. I learned drink in a country of drought. We pleasure to hurt, leave marks the size of stones, each a cabochon polished by our mouths. Your lapidary wheel, turning green, mottled red, the jaspers of our desires. There are wild flowers in my desert which take up to 20 years to bloom. The seeds sleep like geodes beneath hot feldspar sand until a flash flood bolts the arroyo, lifting them in its copper current, opens them with memory. They remember what their God whispered into their ribs. Wake up and ache for your life. Where your hands have been are diamonds on my shoulders, down my back, thighs. I am your culebra. I am in the dirt for you. Your hips are quartz light and dangerous, two rose-horn rams ascending a soft desert wash before the November sky untethers 100-year flood. The desert returns suddenly to its ancient sea. Arise the wild heliotrope, scorpion weed, blue phacelia, which hold purple the way a throat can hold the shape of any great hand. Great hands is what she called mine. The rain will eventually come or not. Until then, we touch our bodies like wounds. The war never ended and somehow begins again.
Wow, that was a banger, everybody. And now we are going to take this poem line by line, and I'm going to show you all the things she is doing to make this work. So, Post-Colonial Love Poem. I've been taught bloodstones can cure a snake bite, can stop the bleeding. Most people forgot this when the war ended. The war ended depending on which war you mean. Those we started, before those millennia ago and onward. Those which started me, which I lost and won. These ever-blooming wounds. So we already see a contrast here. That she was taught something, an indigenous healing technique, but most people forgot about this because of colonialism. But then she throws the war that she's taught into obscurity because depending on which war you mean. Those we started with, obviously warring within indigenous populations, obviously the wars against the Europeans, which they didn't start, but then also the wars that are inside of me, which I won and lost. So she's contrasting the variability of her emotions with the thousands of wars and conflicts that have happened in indigenous history in North America. Very smart, just to, open up. And it's also interesting, the snake bite, how a bloodstone can cure a snake bite. A snake bite is something that brings upon death. So we're hearing this idea of death, but then she brings in, I was built by wage. This is, bring maybe a critique of capitalism. So I wage love and worse, always another campaign to march across. So now she set us up with the war and wage. So we have this language, and she's bringing this language in to explain her points. And it's very smart. So I wage love and worse, always another campaign to march across a desert night for the cannon flash of your pale skin, settling in a silver lagoon of smoke at your breast. And these are some genius lines here. So always another campaign to march across. So we see movement here. We're seeing movement. So, but now she takes us back to the environment. Now we tether back to the environment. A desert night for the cannon flash. So we have darkness, night, then cannon flash, brightness. But then the cannon obviously connects back to the warring idea of your pale skin. So now we're talking about love. And once again, another color contrast. And then she kills the game with a beautiful gerund, ing, settling in a silver lagoon. And because when you loaded the front of a poetry line with a gerund, usually an image follows. You're setting yourself up for a nice image. Settling in a silver lagoon of smoke at your breast. And we can see cannon contrasting smoke. You know, cannons emit smoke. You know, really in this first stanza, there's a lot of layers which really aid the rest of this poem and set it up. Really smart stuff by Diaz here. So let's check out the second stanza. I dismount my dark horse, bend to you there, deliver you the hard pull of all my thirsts. I learned drink in a country of drought. And obviously she's maybe playing, I can't really tell here, maybe playing with the idea of alcoholism in the Native American community. In her other book, When My Brother Was an Aztec, that was more about addiction out in the desert. She lived, and I think she's from, and has a connection to the Mojave Desert region between like Las Vegas and Los Angeles, out there maybe near Barstow, California. And it's obviously kind of rough out there. I actually met Natalie Diaz. I don't think I said this. And she was super cool to me. I was at a book signing event and there was a bunch of authors and there was no one in her line. And I turned the corner and I saw her and I was like, oh my God, it's Natalie Diaz. When Your Brother Was an Aztec was great. And then she, reciprocated some energy, very kind to me. And that's a big theme of her work as you see in her, in this collection. She talks a lot about, addiction and alcoholism. We pleasure to hurt. Leave marks the size of stones. There's just contrast. All right, we pleasure to hurt. I learned drink in a country of drought. That's one of the best things to do with poetry and to create metaphors, is to be layering this contrast in. And if you revise a poem enough times you can start to add more and more of this contrast and layering, and it's really nice. This parallelism, it makes things much better. Each a cabochon polished by our mouths. And so another thing that we're starting to see is, if we look up here at the top, if we look up at these lines until about right here, these first 6 lines, they are very personal. We see I, lots of personal pronouns, we, pleasure, I. And one of a tactic, especially if you're trying to use the environment and stuff to create expansiveness in a poem, is to start with, to move between personal and impersonal, or like the environment. This is a classic technique of Chinese wilderness poets. They'll start off a poem either completely immersed in nature, or with or about them, and then by the end they evaporate. The poem evaporates into pure nature, or then pure society. Most of the time it goes from the self into nature, though, and that's what we're about to see right here. I, your lapidary wheel, turning, green mottled red, the jaspers of our desires. So once again, we see her moving images with with gerunds right here, turning, then mottled and polished, which are verbal adjectives. And you could see Diaz also does a very good job of using things like turning. She places us in time and directs the body and directs movement with her words, which is the best thing you can do with verbs, because if you create movement with the verbs and then deliver on the image, green mottled red, the jasper of our desires, then that's beautiful. And so now we've almost devolved right here at green mottled red. Now we've moved back to nature. So next, and here's where things start really getting good, there are wildflowers in my desert which take up to 20 years to bloom. I mean, that is as good of a line that you can get. Wildflowers in a desert, not rare, but not common, which take up to 20 years to bloom. That personal development, spiritual growth in general isn't this slow, instant thing. Is sometimes slow. And poetry, and the mastery of poetry and great poems are slow. The seeds sleep like geodes beneath hot feldspar sand, until a flash flood bolts the arroyo, lifting them up in its copper current, opens them with memory. I mean, so much is happening here. The seeds sleep like geodes beneath hot feldspar sand. So we already see sleep. The seeds are sleeping like geodes. We see a creation of the image beneath hot feldspar sand. So we see movement beneath, and these seeds are her internal growth that is happening, and they're sleeping under this hot sound until a flash. And we see sleep contrasts flash, a flash flood, and the flood obviously being the contrast of the desert. And then obviously probably having some biblical or symbolic significance. Flash flood bolts, great verb, the arroyo. Now we see her start to lift. We were sleeping. Now we're starting to move. Where there was a flash moment. Now we have movement. Now we're going to start lifting. You can hear the prose lift. Lifting them in its copper current. Lifting with the current. Well, look at that word. We have current, bolt, lift, beneath, sleep. She's directing us. The current is, we're imagining the movement. And then what the last direction, opens them with memory. And that connection between, now she's saying that, the connection to memory is great. They remember what their God whispered into their ribs. Wake up and ache for your life. And this is one of the theme of Diaz's work, that life is not easy, that life and the pursuit of art is hard, and hard things happen. Where your hands been are diamonds. So now she did this whole thing where she went once again from nature back to the personal. At the end, wake up and ache for your life. Now we are back. We've been awoken from the dream, because now where your hands have been are diamonds. On my shoulders, down my back, thighs. I am your kulbra. We're now back at a love poem. I am in the dirt for you. Your hips are quartz light and dangerous. Two rose-horned rams ascending a soft desert wash before the November sky untethers 100-year flood. So we have the flood, then again, the desert returns suddenly to its ancient sea. Contrast. And when we hear I am your kulbra, I am in the dirt for you. This is, as she is writing like a modern mainstream author here. She is giving us the confessional love poetry that, that Rupi Kaur and all those people have made popular, but she's doing it with substance. This is what I always talk about, that all these poets today are missing all this other stuff. She got to the, the punchline, got to the whimsical punchlines. I'm in the dirt for you, talking about love, after she gave a massive metaphor about her growth and her love being seeds sleeping in the desert, and telling us how they grow out and what the seeds speak to her when they're finally bloomed. This isn't simple. This is actually how reality works. This is a transmission of reality through beautiful poetry, and that's what poetry is supposed to be. Arise, the wild heliotrope, scorpion weed, blue phacelia, which hold purple the way a throat can hold the shape of any great hand. Great hands is what she called mine. The rain will eventually come or not. Until then, we touch our bodies like wounds. The war never ended and somehow begins again. Lots of contrast here at the end. We obviously bring back the war theme, touch our bodies like wounds. Ton of contrast in there. This is magnificent poem by Natalie Diaz. And the rest of her collection is great. And I would recommend all of her work. We admitted that we were human beings and melted for love in this desert. So everyone, please go check out Post-Colonial Love Poem by Natalie Diaz. It is one of the better poetry books released in the 2020s. And if you guys would like to see my favorite Native American, me talk about some of the best Native American fiction around, go check out this video right here. Peace.